Hey guys, welcome back to Will Code for Food. I'm Jake the Recruiter, and today I'm going to be continuing my conversation with sort of the basics around how to conduct an in-person interview for your IT job. So last time we touched on some of the stuff like your mindset, the punctuality, clothing, that sort of thing. So today we're going to just kind of wrap up with some of the other basic things that you should consider in terms of preparation and actually heading into that interview. So when you arrive for the in-person interview, one of the things that I've seen people kind of run afoul of is introducing yourself to every single person in the same way and acknowledging every person that you interact with. And I don't care if it's the receptionist or the person, the assistant sometimes that's bringing you to the interview room, or in a panel interview. If you're getting introduced to people on your way into the interview, every single person gets a handshake, eye contact, hi, nice to meet you, I'm X. This kind of thing is really important, because I've had interviews where certain people that are internal at that company feel like they were alienated because they weren't acknowledged as much as maybe somebody that has a higher position in the company or has a higher stake in determining whether or not you get the job. Every person you meet is going to have some level of say in whether or not you get hired. So don't run the risk of somebody feeling like you kind of made them feel less important, or discounted their role in that process by not giving them the same level of attention that you are to everybody else. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're actually interacting with the people at that company. Copies of your resume. So this is very old hat advice, and I get a lot of kind of eye rolling when I bring this up. I like to bring, whether it's a little portfolio or a folder or something, bring, 5 or 6 clean printed copies of your resume. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come up. I just say, why not? People are like, oh, it's 2018. Every resume is digital. If they really want it, they'll print it out, whatever. Like, just have it with you. If something comes up on the resume or the interview, a lot of times I've seen people get into the interview room and then they're like, oh, I forgot to, I want to have a copy of your resume here. I'm going to go print it, whatever. It's like, you can just say, oh, I've got one right here. It's like, I just think there's no reason not to do it. Again, the advice that I'm going to give you is not going to necessarily be relevant to every single interview that you go on, but the idea is, again, that you cover all your bases. You make sure that there's no sort of missing link. I've never had somebody be like, oh, we're not going to hire this guy, he didn't show up with copies of your resume. But it's like, it's just one of those nice touches. Why not just have that prepared in case it comes up? A lot of times the reason that somebody doesn't get hired, it isn't something really glaring and specific. It's sort of an aggregate of other factors. Or the reason that somebody does get hired, it's an aggregate of these smaller things where it's like, yeah, they were articulate and professional, and they came in on time, and they had copies of their resume, and it was obvious that they were taking the opportunity really seriously. Sometimes these little positives can kind of overcome objections that otherwise might have cost you the job. A lot of times I'll get feedback that's like, okay, they were sort of missing the mark in these few areas of the tasks that we want them to do. They're going to face a bit of a learning curve in this other area, but they seem like somebody I want on my team. They seem like somebody that's going to be teachable and is going to be open to learning new ideas and eager and those kind of things. So if you can convey some of those other things, a lot of times that can maybe make up for shortcomings in other areas. And I feel like printing a few copies of the resume, it costs you what, 3 minutes and 19 cents. Just do it. Like, there's no reason not to. That's just my take on it. So this next one is huge, and this is when the conversation actually starts. So I want to talk about pitch matching and kind of what that is. So you're going to run into all kinds of personalities in your interviews. Sometimes people will be energetic and bubbly, and they're smiling a lot and they're high energy and this kind of thing. Do what you can to kind of match that person's energy as much as possible, and speak to them in the way that they're speaking to you. As far as, like, if there's somebody that's laughing a lot and they're making small talk, like, respond to that and crack a couple corny jokes, whatever it is. It's going to make that person more comfortable. It's going to make them like you more. It's going to kind of open them up. This isn't about conning people or being somebody you're not, or that kind of thing. It's like, look, we all do this in our regular lives anyways. If you think about the last maybe cookout you went to that you didn't know everybody. It's like you're going to kind of talk to people differently based on how they're interacting with you. So, for example, if you have a lot of technical people, they tend to be very direct, very concise in their communication. They like short, simple answers to short, simple questions. So if you are dealing with that kind of person, then respond in that way. You don't give a lot of fluff. Don't give a lot of stuff that isn't directly relevant to what they're asking you. Look at the question that they're asking you, and use that as a way to give them exactly what they're asking for in that question, and then you can maybe turn that into a question for them. Let the conversation evolve a little bit organically. That sort of thing. But basically, match the other person in terms of their energy level, their communication style, that kind of thing. Because if you're going highly contrary to that, then a lot of times it can sort of create the impression that, okay, this person isn't a culture fit, or they're not a fit for my team, or whatever it is. And you should just get used to that as a general rule for your professional career. If you haven't already, you're going to understand that very quickly, that your ability to sort of be that chameleon and interact with people on their level is going to get you a lot more credibility. It's going to get you a much better working relationship. And it's not about manipulation. It's not about lying. It's not about sort of projecting a persona that's not you. It's just about being accommodating and putting people at ease and making that interaction that much more comfortable. I do this all the time with candidates. It's like a lot of I deal with IT people, so it's predominantly men. It's predominantly guys that are very sort of brisk communicators. They're like, they know what they want. They want clear answers, and they don't want smoke and mirrors. I try not to sound really salesy when I talk to them. A lot of recruiters sort of sound like that, where it's like, oh my gosh, it's so great to talk to you. I have the best opportunity. It's like, I've heard so many people complain about this stuff that I really try hard to avoid it. But then occasionally you'll come across somebody and you see it a lot more with particular disciplines like project managers, for example, because they're liaising between a lot of different types of people. They're much more communicative as a rule, and they're outgoing. And again, these are just general trends that I've observed. There's obviously going to be exceptions to the rule, but a lot of PMs that I talk to, it's like they're good conversationalists, and they like to lighten the mood and talk about sports or the weather or whatever it is. And there's kind of a little bit of glad handing, like even on the phone, before we kind of get down to what the purpose of the actual call is. So I'm gonna meet them at that level, and I'm not gonna bother them with that stuff if they're like, look, I'm busy. What do you got? I'm on a limited time schedule. I'm going to make the most of that interaction and give them exactly what they need, so that they don't feel like their time is being wasted. What I don't want is somebody to be on the phone with me like, okay, when is this guy going to shut up? Why won't he just give me a straight answer? That kind of thing. So in the interview situation, consider what your interviewer is trying to get. Look at their communication style, look at the way that they ask questions and the way that they answer questions and the way that they're talking to you, and sort of respond in kind. So researching the company, this is one that I think a lot of people, typically they overdo it. Underdoing it is to not look up anything on the company at all. You should know some really basic information about this company. I think every company that you walk into, you should know how big they are. You should know the basics of what they do. Okay, and typically that's how do they make their money? What product or service does this company offer that causes people to give them money, and where do you fit in? It's like it sounds like a very preschool way of putting this, but just you should know that basic thing. You should know where you fit into this organization. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. If you're interviewing for a help desk job, it's like, okay, I can pretty much guess that I'm probably going to be troubleshooting some type of issues. It's like, but ask that, maybe even dig in on that a little bit more. Use that as one of your interview questions. Okay, where does this position fit in? Why are you hiring for this role? Use their response to kind of create an organic conversation off of that. But when it comes to researching the company, don't go crazy with it. I think that most company research for an interview situation should be done in between 15 and 30 minutes. You don't need to know the names of their management, they're upper management people. You don't need to know what their story is or what year they were founded. Like, none of this stuff is going to come up in the interview. If you're just really interested in them and you want to look at that stuff because you're curious, like, by all means, go for it. But my opinion is always, like, I typically end up taking multiple interviews, between jobs. You always should. And I'm not going to invest like 3 hours of research into every one of these, but know how big they are, some of the basics about how they make their money, what is the specific location, if it's a really large company, what is the specific location that you're interviewing at do? Because a lot of times companies, they have their, what they're doing dispersed across multiple locations. Not all of them are doing the same things. So know some of those nuts and bolts on the way in, but you're probably going to get some question about, what do you know about us? What attracted you to the job? Whatever it is. And you should have some sort of a rudimentary answer for that. Especially as a recruiter, I'll sometimes ask people like, okay, what do you know about Acme, like the company that I work for? And it's like, I don't expect very much from them, and no is an acceptable answer there. I don't really I don't look at it as a red flag if they didn't, research a company that they applied to. You're applying to hundreds of them, so it's not a big deal, but just get those bare bones so that you have something that you know about them, and it's enough to sort of create a conversation around that if it comes up. Body language. So body language during an IT interview is it's an interesting thing because you're typically, the people that struggle with it are very nervous. And so there's a lot of things that we do when we're nervous. The first is rambling. So what I mean by that is if you've been talking for a while and you sort of get to this point where you're realizing that everybody's staring at you and you're just talking, you don't know what you're talking about anymore, like stop talking and say something like, okay, does that answer your question or whatever? But in terms of the way that you sit in the chair, like you want to have good posture, but you also don't want to, you don't want to like be like this the whole time and just like staring at people. It's think about natural conversations that you have, whether it's at a coffee shop or a restaurant or whatever it is. Obviously I kind of talk with my hands. That's just something that I do. I think that that's totally fine. But what you want to avoid is something that seems too relaxed. So, like kind of getting down in your seat like this, or something that's a little too attentive where you're just rigid. Just relax, let it go organically. I find that one of the things people forget to do when they're really nervous is breathe. Just breathe normally. Don't hold your breath. It's probably not as big of a deal as you're making it out to be. Avoid nervous tics. There's a few nervous tics that I see people use, whether it's like you're like tapping your fingers on the table, or you kind of do this thing where you swivel back and forth in your chair, or one of mine is I get like the bouncing leg, if I'm in a meeting or something like that. Sometimes I'll do it and I just don't even realize that I'm doing it. It's like these are putting your hands near your face, like doing a lot of this, or like putting your hands under your chin, like sort of letting your shoulders slouch. These are all ways that we either consciously or unconsciously are handling a stressful situation, okay? So if you're doing those things, it means that you're not in the right headspace. It means you need to calm down a little bit, just take a breath. As far as eye contact goes, make a lot of eye contact, but just don't like stare at the person, like making them awkward. Feel free to, sort of readjust, like look around the room, get into the space, be comfortable with it. And what you want to do is you want to convey that this is a conversation of mutual respect. I'm meeting you at your level and you're meeting me at mine. We're both using our time here to have this conversation, and you have my full and undivided attention for the duration of this interview. Like, what do you have for me? And then what do you want to know from my side of the table? Oh, okay, that's important to you. Let's talk about that. It's like your body language will sort of naturally normalize if you have the right mindset. But if you go in there with the impression, and a lot of times this can happen with newer job seekers or people that just get nervous, or particularly in panel interviews, people can feel like they're really being bombarded. This all goes back to that mindset of like, you're not there to prove your worthiness to them. You're not there to pass their test. You're there to have a conversation with representatives or a representative of this company to see if they're going to be able to meet what you need, and vice versa. That's it. You hope there's an alignment there. Maybe there isn't, but you have to get out of the mindset that this is going to somehow be you going to the mountain to get this job. Just get it out of your head. The last thing I'm gonna talk about is cell phones. Shut it off. For the love of God, turn off your cell phone. Not on airplane mode, not on vibrate, off. The perfect solution, I think, is to leave it in your car. If for whatever reason you don't want to do that, turn it off and put it in your pocket. It sounds really silly, and some people are like, oh, well, they disqualify you if your cell phone rings. That's so stupid. It's like, for whatever reason, there's a stigma around it. I personally don't care. I've been in interviews where I've been interviewing someone and their cell phone rings and they just like rush to it and like turn it off and then they like shove it in their pocket and they're like get embarrassed. It's like, I really don't care. It's never bothered me personally, but what I'm saying is, again, this is a piece of advice. I've seen it cost people jobs, or I've seen it mentioned. It's a social stigma. People will probably make a bigger deal out of it because they can. We're not going to get into that debate. What I'm going to tell you is that if you want to avoid that completely, just turn off your cell phone or leave it in your car. For the love of God, don't make this the reason that you lose a job opportunity. I have actually seen people that it immediately casts a gloom over the entire rest of the interview because this happened, or they get really nervous because their cell phone rings and then they get all thrown off kilter and they feel like they're playing catch up from there. Just don't introduce that. Like there's nowhere that your attention goes during that interview other than directly across the table. Okay. It's like you're giving them this time. You are spending this time of yours to have that conversation. Don't give the impression that you're not there to take it seriously, that your attention isn't in any way divided. Don't talk about it. Whatever you have going on before that interview and later in the day. Forget about all that crap. Stay in the interview situation. You're there to spend this time. Devote it to that. So these are kind of the basics. I'm going to give another couple videos on the actual conversation, questions to ask, some of the cues that you can look for in your interviews and those kind of things. But hopefully this covered some of the basics. And again, guys, maybe you don't agree with all this advice. Maybe maybe there's certain things that haven't exactly been your experience. It's a very subjective process. The advice that I give, again, is designed to create the maximum positive response from the maximum number of people. There's no saying that any one of these pieces of advice is going to cost you a job, or it probably won't. But what I'm saying is when it comes to in-person interviews or any interview situation, err on the side of caution. Don't take chances. Don't dig your heels in over something stupid like turning your cell phone off or wearing a suit or whatever it is, and have that be the stupid thing that costs you the job because you were too unwilling to accept that society runs the way it runs. It's like, just do the basics, set yourself up for success. Don't give them a dumb reason to get rid of you. And it's like, I run into a lot of guys that are like, well, I've done just fine with it. It's great, wonderful for you. I think sometimes it just means that they haven't realized what it has cost them. But basically, if you follow this advice, it can remove some of the basic reasons that people get declined. So I hope you guys got something from this. Please like and subscribe. Trying to get something going here. I really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for stopping by, guys.